and you are listening to KKCR Hanalei KAQA Kilauea. This is Felicia and Marshall with Kauai Soapbox. Father Greg, I am so honored to have you here, and it was wonderful meeting you yesterday. I've been aware of what you do with HomeBoy Industries, seeing things online, basically. But your talk was so touching and so appropriate for really anywhere, certainly Hawaii, anywhere where people are traumatized, broken, sad, which is almost anywhere on this planet. And I appreciate you very much taking time out of your trip here to Kauai to share a little bit with us. And I want to kind of let you start wherever you want to, because you were a really amazing speaker yesterday.
Well, I thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm making a retreat, so I've been silent all day, so I'm not used to talking, so I'm rusty. So, but just fire away. I mean, I don't know whatever's on your mind.
I think that what might be good, because not everybody listening understands what your background was, and so if you could help us understand, I'm going to say a few of the key takeaways for me, but then to help you kind of come to the beginning of it, what I heard from you that was so meaningful to me is how important is the circle of compassion, and to have a heart frame of tenderness. And when we see anybody, whether we agree with them or don't, politically, or they frighten us on the street, or whatever it might be, that if we really stand in awe of the burden that they carry, instead of standing in judgment of how they carry that burden, that it helps unify us and bring us to a space where we can actually begin the conversation. And whether that's politically or in the environment that you have worked with, which is some of the street violence, you're having success at walking alongside people as they regain dignity and a powerful sense of purpose. And so I just really invite you to share your story, almost with the presumption that many people here probably don't know what's happening in Los Angeles. A lot of people here don't have a focus on the continental United States, yet it is very, very relevant. And here I'd say we have more self-violence than overt violence to others, but it's still the same challenge.
Well, I work with gang members, and I've done that for 30 years. I'm a Jesuit priest, and I worked in a very poor parish that had the highest concentration of gang activity. So we tried to, our options were bury our heads in the sand as a community, or to roll up our sleeves. So we decided to do the sleeve thing, and so we started a school and started a jobs program. Then we started social enterprises, and now 30 years later, I run this program called HomeBoy Industries, which is the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So we get 15,000 folks a year walking through our doors, trying to reimagine their lives, trying to plan their future instead of their funeral. And but above all, more than just tattoo removal or job training or classes or anger management or therapy, HomeBoy sort of represents this revolution of tenderness. What if we were to create a place that was safe and secure, a liminal space, as they would call it, or a sacred space where people could discover their own resilience and their own indomitable spirit. I was just listening as I was driving in here to Barack Obama's farewell. And he talked about, this, it's a line he's used before, where he talks about the reservoir of goodness. And so he says, presume a reservoir of goodness in the other, which I think is pretty good. And but people find that as sort of an untenable belief. especially when we've so heightened our sense of demonizing the other. And it can be anybody, Muslim, gang member, immigrant.
Political leader.
Yeah, that's right. Or supporters of said political leader. And so I think it's a good caution because I think, Mother Teresa said the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So the more we can see ourselves as kin, the healthier we are. I mean, in the end, even our own literature as a country talks about a more perfect union. And that's what you want, is a more perfect union where the circle of compassion widens and nobody is left outside of it.
And so these gang members in your area, and you had a grade school at your parish, correct?
Elementary school, yeah. Mm-hmm.
An elementary school, and then you moved the upper grades by moving out the convent?
Yeah, so I sort of asked the nuns to leave, and so we turned it into a school for gang members. And that was on the 3rd floor. That was the first thing we did. And because they were kind of wreaking havoc in the projects and nobody wanted them, no school wanted them. And that was in sort of the days when if the gang thing started to rear its head, then local schools, middle schools, high schools, junior highs would say, we can't have you here. I don't know where you're going to go, but we can't have you here. I'm not sure that I blame them. There was that period of time when they would casework these kids and somehow try to incorporate them. But then it just became too difficult. They were spending so much time with fights and violence on campus that they basically banished them from the public schools. And that's why our school started at a time when there were very few of those alternatives.
And then did the students choose to go to your school, or was it the adjudication process and they were sent there? What brought the kids to your schools?
No, they all wanted, it was born because I asked them, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And then I tried to find a school that would take them, and there wasn't a school, especially at that young age, junior high age. So once we started the school, I just walked out into the projects, and then there were so many who were schoolless that they said sure, and so they came. I suppose we probably at somewhere, once we were more established, judges might have assigned them, or probation officers, but by and large that's never been a characteristic of what we do. It's more the principle of a gang member being drawn to the place, hearing from friends, they'll accept you there, they'll help you there.
And so what bridged it from youth education into an industry, business?
Well, I think part of the thing is there's there are two stances. One is humble and the other one is hubris, So humility asks the question, what would help you? And hubris says, here's what your problem is, and here's how you need to fix yourself. So as long as you're humble and you're asking people what would help you. So in the course of that, gang members started to say they were appreciative of the school, but they started to say, if only we had jobs. And then they wanted, the dignity of work, and they wanted clean money in their pockets, years ago in Freakonomics, they talked about how gang members would run up to cars, which was sort of my early experience. Young gang members running up to cars in the projects, professional people who would drive into the projects and they'd sell them crack cocaine. And Freakonomics posed this question that said, why would young males mainly risk death and prison and it turned out to be like, $3 an hour was sort of what they made. Why would they risk so much for so little? Which was a worthy question, I thought. But they had a bad answer, so sometimes the outsider view will drive the inside of our policy and sometimes answer our questions. So the Freakonomics people started to say, oh, I see what it is. They're aspiring to be big drug dealers in the same way, and their example was the same way the starlet, the budding, aspiring movie star, begins as a waitress because at some point she aspires to this stardom. And I thought, wow, that's so off. Nothing could be farther from the truth. They risk death in prison for $3 an hour selling crack because they've ceased to care. They don't care whether they live or die. They can't imagine a future for themselves. Their present isn't compelling. They just don't care whether they inflict harm or duck to get out of harm's way. So it was a good question, but it was the wrong answer. And so what you want to do is somehow keep your ear as close to the ground and to this population or any group on the margins, and where you can say, what would help you? Because they'll tell you if you ask them. But a lot of times we're too busy in our own hubris, utterly convinced of what they need.
And with this population, I always hear the word the projects, and we hardly have any projects here. People can be houseless here. We're about 25% housing insecure. Many people are hidden homeless, but many people are, on the beach, basically being flushed from one place to the next. Are these people that you typically work with, do they have a place to go put their head down at night that they can call where they belong?
Well, I think it's as insecure as you describe, especially with the population that we're encountering right now, gang member who's been released after many years in prison, and all bridges have been burned, and there's no there. No family wants them anymore. So they'll come to us, and they'll begin work, and they'll enter our 18-month training program, but they don't have a secure place to live. So they're on a couch, and they're moving from one place to the next, sleeping in their car or somebody else's car. So we try to address that as quickly as we can so that doesn't, so that's no longer a stressor for them. But certainly homelessness is, but projects is a kind of a, public housing, which got changed quite a bit during the Clinton, and during what he called the Hope Six, where they tore a lot of those places down, like in Chicago, Cabrini Green. And certainly our two projects were torn down and rebuilt, and they tried to rethink less dense, mixed income. They tried lots of experiments. It reduced the housing stock overall, which was a problem, but it did sort of eliminate this high density, hugely, fraught with social kind of dilemma, like gangs and drugs and such.
And you shared yesterday that the way it seemed to me like a big step that went forward is a wealthy person actually came and asked how you need help, right? You said somebody helped you.
Yeah, a movie producer named Ray Stark, who was kind of a super agent. He was Humphrey Bogart's agent, and then he became this huge movie producer, Funny Girl, and a whole slew of movies. And he made a ton of money. And at one point, he didn't get paid. He just had stock in Columbia Studios or something. And then when Sony bought it, he was the wealthiest beneficiary. So he has since died, but he was a cantankerous character. But he liked the fact that my community, my parish community, and the projects hadn't exploded during the 92 unrest. So, which was the 92 unrest, because we have a lot of young listeners. What stimulated the 92 unrest in Los Angeles? That was the Rodney King verdict, and then the whole city went crazy. Except our little pocket, which was the poorest pocket in the city. So, so you had a lot of youth, 60 to be exact, 60 strategically hired rival gang members working together side by side.
At your place?
Yeah, at a variety of places. We had maintenance crew, a landscaping crew. They were building the child care center at that point. And so it kind of brought the temperature down, and it inoculated us, or my community anyway, from explosion. And he was wondering why. So then there was a period after the unrest where people started to make this connection between the unrest and the gang reality. Come 92, that was the highest moment of gang-related homicides ever in the history of the city. We've never gotten near that since.
And so that number was like roughly...
like 1,100 homicides just in LA City.
Per year?
Not in just that 1 year. Yeah.
Well.
So keep in mind that Chicago recently had, whatever it was, 762 homicides, and which is startling given how their population, etc.
So this film man, he helped you to buy a bakery.
A bakery across the street from the church, and an abandoned bakery, old bakery. And so with his money, we rehabbed it. We called it HomeBoy Bakery. We had enemy rival gang members baking bread together. And then that became quite kind of the centerpiece of the thing. We're at a time when you had the highest kind of incidents of gang violence, where people were kind of beside themselves and vexed by how to wrap our solutions around this problem. And so it was a symbol. It announced a message. What if we were to invest in people rather than just keep endlessly, futilely, mindlessly incarcerating our way out of our problems? So that kind of galvanized kind of two spirits. One was people had grown tired of tough on crime, so they thought, wow, this feels smart on crime. And then with gang members, it was a fascinating historic and symbolic moment, because gang violence was like a freeway, which is what we have a lot of in LA, with no exit ramp at all. So people were kind of shaking their fist at the gang members and say, get off the freeway, this crazy violent freeway. And there was no exit ramp. And then suddenly HomeBoy Industries appeared, and it was the very first exit ramp where gang members could imagine, oh, I could get off this, couldn't I?
And gang members typically are young?
Well, 14 is usually about 13, 14 is when a kid regrettably gets into a gang.
And when do they grow out of it?
Well, again, you want to accelerate the maturation process, So we have young kids right out of probation camp, detention facilities, under 17, but the vast majority are over 20.
But how about over 40?
Oh, yeah. Gang members, of course, part of what they would say is, you're a gang member for life.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you help people that are 50 years old or 60 years old.
Especially right now with folks being released from prison finally for the first time. We have a gang member who's 60 years old who works at HomeBoy.
And you were talking about, a lethal absence of hope. And some of these profiles of what is a potential gang member. And when you were describing that, I was thinking, well, that can be anywhere.
Yeah, I think in society, the profile of a kid who joins the gang is really the same as the profile of the kid or young person, or old person who comes to us after having been in prison. It's the same profile. It's about despair. It's about the traumatized, and it's about the mentally ill. And so if you can take any kind of social thing that is quite vexing for us as people, homelessness, drug addiction, opioid addiction.
How about grief? Profound grief. That's what I see as a thread in a lot of the people that I've known since they were very young, and they start making these bad choices, but they've had primary deaths, a brother, a parent, houselessness. It's
yeah,
grief.
I think you could weave grief into trauma, into a despair that people can't lift themselves out of, or even a mental health and ability to be resilient in the face of something quite awful, and having a sense of purpose. Everybody needs a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to engage in whatever is holding you back at night.
We've been following the challenges at Standing Rock in North Dakota, and something that has been very positive there is almost zero youth suicides and crime, because they have a sense of purpose in standing up for the health of their land and their people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's quite right. In the end, human beings need to kind of know with an unshakable certainty that they're somehow okay, that they're exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And people, once you hold the mirror up, once you've chosen to be an enlightened witness to a kid like that who for whom hope is foreign and a sense of purpose is foreign. At HomeBoy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking people to measure up. We don't really like that idea of a meritocracy, of somehow measure up to your worth. It's about, especially because there's so, shame and disgrace is the principal suffering of the poor, period, always. And so how do you reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from discovering their own truth? And it's about discovering a truth that's already there. It's not here, measure up, here, become a good person, here, discover your potential. I had a board member once praise me by saying, you see every gang member, and in the gang member you see potential. And I remember thinking, no. First of all, what do I know from potential? And I don't really care about potential. I care about, I just want to see goodness and that reservoir of goodness that everybody possesses. And people will say things like, well, everybody can become a productive member of society. And I go, no. We have a lot of folks who are just, productive is a terrible way to measure things. Goodness is a better way. And there are a lot of folks who are unemployable, frankly, at HomeBoy. And because they're too war weary and traumatized and mentally ill. But that's okay. I just got a text from a kid named Anthony who will never be productive. But I'm so glad he works at HomeBoy, because he calls us all to, he's our teacher in gentleness and tenderness, and calls us to our best selves. And so I suppose it depends on how you define productivity, but I'm less inclined to think that that's very important. I think it's more important for people to find the dignity of their own goodness and to allow a community of tenderness to activate that. And
what I see here sometimes is that there's a lot of mental health issues, and sometimes that's aggravated by houselessness. I've seen housing first discussions from different communities. Is that at all in Los Angeles? Do you have any housing first? I know that housing first does happen in Salt Lake City and a lot of different places.
Portland. I think right now we are, because now it's homelessness has never been as grave a social dilemma as it currently is. And so a lot of us in Los Angeles are trying to get the governor to declare this a state of emergency, and so that you could activate emergency funding. Because if you had 120,000 displaced folks who were living on the streets because of an earthquake, you would that would be more than enough to activate those resources. So, but it's definitely an issue, and of course the truth of the home housing first movement is to relieve this chronic unrelieved stress, so that people who are living on the streets or are without a house no longer have to operate from this survivor brain that's intensely stressful all the time.
So what do you mean by survivor brain?
Well, it's just, gang members have it and homeless folks have it, and it's a kind of watch your back, and every moment is kind of soaked with a sense of dread and anxiety. If you can kind of lift them out of that and help them just kind of, feel some stress-free moments and calm and peace, then they can discover their own resilience and their ability to put one foot in front of the next. But as long as they're on the streets and trying to be on guard and constant, the stressors of living on the streets or being a gang member without any prospects, those are very comparable moments, I think, for both populations.
Mm-hmm. And you're listening to KKCR Hanalei, KAQA Kilauea. This is Felicia and Marshall with Kauai Soapbox. And in the studio with us is Father Greg Boyle, and he's with HomeBoy Industries and in the Catholic Church, right? Catholic Church is in there.
They're somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. I mean, so it's a really good application of the church.
I think, yeah. I mean, although I don't have much connection to the church,
So the church isn't funding it?
No, not even a little bit.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay.
Never.
All right.
They've never funded HomeBoy.
Not any of it.
None of it.
Okay. So this is all community development.
Yeah, donations and donors and grants and foundations.
Last week we had a professor of history on the show from University of Hawaii, Dr. Ron Williams Jr., and so he announced on here a fund drive to be putting a monument for a person that had a piece of history that was lost. And I just want to acknowledge to the listener, hey, they exceeded their goal in a week, and so they're going to be able to do it. Dreams do come true. Crowdfunding is helping. Do you have largely large donors, or do you crowdsource, or?
No, we're kind of the Bernie Sanders of nonprofits. We have a lot of millions of $37 checks kind of thing, So
Perfect.
We have a lot of people who support it, but we have to raise $10 million a year, and the other $9 million that we need in terms of revenue comes from all our social enterprises. Bakery, several restaurants, recycling operation, silkscreen factory.
Well, I really want to applaud you for what you're doing. Is suicide much of a challenge in your community?
Well, among the gang population, it's an interesting thing. I probably, I've buried 218 gang members in 30 years, and 3 of them took their own lives, which was always a kind of a hard thing for gang members to process, because if a gang member wanted to take his own life, he would walk into harm's way. He'd go to an enemy territory and hope to die. The whole gang banging is really the urban poor's version of teenage suicide. They're walking into enemy territory, not hoping to kill anybody, but they're definitely hoping to die. But to do it very directly, there are only 3 that I know that I've buried, which seems remarkable, actually, because a lot of suburban, more middle class and upper class neighborhoods
Have a higher incidence.
Oh yeah, you'd ask priests or ministers about their rate of burying teenagers who've killed themselves. It's huge. It's quite a problem everywhere, but it's not a problem, oddly, in the barrio, in poor pockets, just because they've discovered an acceptable way to do it. Which is the same way of saying it's about a lethal absence of hope, where people have given up, and so they kind of imagine a blaze of glory, and they go over there and you hope, that they'll come back.
Well, when you speak of a $19 million budget, that's a pretty big operation. So about how many people choose to be a part of HomeBoy Industries in a given year? How many?
We serve 15,000 a year.
15,000 a year.
Yeah.
Pretty good amount.
Yeah. So, that's because we have all these services other than our 18-month program, where, we have at any given time 500 people who work there. But otherwise, people are coming in for therapy, case management, classes, tattoo removal.
And when they want to remove a tattoo, it's a gang tattoo.
Yeah, we only remove gang-related tattoos.
So it's not really a statement on tattoos. It's a statement on the choice of tattoo, and they decide they want to take that.
Yeah, even the folks who work for us, we don't put any pressure, But in the old days, it started with a guy named Frank, who I didn't know, and he 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison, and he's sitting in front of me, and tattooed on his forehead, and I don't know if you can say these things, but
you can't cuss. You can say F word or whatever.
And it said F the world tattooed on his forehead, spelled like a big old billboard. And he said, I'm having a hard time finding a job. And I said, well, maybe we could put our heads together on this one. So I hired him, and he bagged bread for a couple of years, actually, at our bakery. Then I found a doctor who donated 1 hour a month. He was a dermatologist at a hospital. And so he chipped away at Frank's forehead and a few others who had alarming facial tattoos. And before too long, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted the same service. So I couldn't really stay with that arrangement, But so we never force people to do it. It's a little bit like therapy, you don't want to waste a visit. When you're ready, let me know. In the old days, we used to do a neck and face, elbow down. And once a guy came to me, and he lifted up his shirt and had a huge tattoo that covered his chest of the name of his gang. And I said, well, keep your shirt on. Who's going to see it? And he said, my son will see it. And I went, all right. It's extremely painful to remove, as opposed to putting it on.
More.
Yeah, way more. It's like bacon grease. I mean, it's really burning terrible. But they do it. And there's a guy who kind of runs the place now, gang member, his whole neck was blackened with the name of his gang. And when homies come with alarming tattoos, I say, you find me the guy here who's one of our leaders who runs the place. And he had a neck tattoo. Find me that guy. And they can't, because there's no trace of it left. And we all make mistakes, but this is a mistake that people can erase.
And mostly other homies pick the new clients, right? The new team members. Is that them, you? I mean, 15,000 people, you can't possibly pick them all.
Yeah, not all of them come to be part of the 18-month training program. But we have a thing called the selection committee, made up of homies who work there, who have an interview with folks. And we don't want folks who just simply want a job. We'll help you find a job elsewhere. But this is a place of healing. And it's, a therapeutic place. And the hope is that you'll be able to, they'll be able to identify somebody who really wants to do the work, the inner work that will keep them from returning to prison or reoffending. So
15,000 a year times 30. I'm sure some of them are part of the team for years, but that's a significant amount of people.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was always 15,000. In the early days, it was considerably fewer.
But so it sounds like it's a story of hope. Like we're focusing on what is so hard in getting in there, but do most people stay out of prison? Is there much people who fall back into the gang world, or do they, gain their confidence and able to contribute in a way that they feel empowered by?
Well, it's a little bit like recovery. If at the end of every 12-step program, they always say, keep coming back. It works if you work it. So, does AA work? It's 100% successful for people who work it. And HomeBoy is the same thing. It's 100% successful if you work this program. If you meet the program halfway, if you cooperate in your own healing, that person's not going to go back to prison, period.
Well, wonderful. And I want to open up the phone lines if people have questions or anything like that, 826-7771. And you and anybody can call in at any time, but I got another question for you. You said you were listening to Barack Obama's farewell speech on your way up here. Did you get to finish it?
No, because once I pulled into the parking lot here, you don't have a good reception, so I didn't catch the end.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that's Jazz with John.
I saw it all. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. I was just at the tail end, I think,
Yeah.
because he said in conclusion, but he wasn't concluding. But he was great.
I'm sure it's on and you can see it again.
Yeah.
So I thank you for coming in here
Sure.
and missing that. So what did that leave you with? When you're looking forward, in our last segment, we were speaking with a civil rights activist who has a lot of history for decades, back to Martin Luther King's time. And I would say that, he's very much still supporting, taking a movement in things. When you're looking at the future, are you impacted by the administrative change, or are you feeling like, six of one, half a dozen of the other? How are you feeling?
Well, I think part of, I think this is talk about grieving. It was a broken heart, as far as I'm concerned, a very broken-hearted moment, and yet real loss will always remind you of what you care about, what you cherish. Thornton Wilder said there are only two kinds of people who know how to cherish, and that's saints and poets. And so now is a time more than any for us to kind of be saints or poets, to kind of know what we cherish and what we care about. And I think that's important. So rather than, kind of get stuck in our grief, we can get to a place where we identify the things that we care about precisely because of this moment,
Something I feel like we're seeing here is, there's always jubilation in music, but there is a lot of healing music happening on Kauai and around the islands. And then in these different social movements that are underway, we have a pretty big one on the island of Hawaii over the 30-meter telescope. And what I'm seeing is people being able to move out of the dominant culture when they're all in these encampments, and you see some of the best of people coming out. They bond. There's family unity with strangers. They're learning their indigenous languages. They're separating into having schools and education, medical things. It's a natural form of self-governance that is underway, and along with it, there's a lot of music that's just bubbling up everywhere, and singing and dancing together. And I'm seeing in these events an absence of drugs and alcohol. And, that's kind of a beautiful thing. Are you seeing that in L.A.?
Well, I think whatever kind of connects people to a real sense of kinship. In the end, I think that's what we're all called to, we're called to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it, where we're kin, where we're connected. And we have a lot of work to do, because, I just read, whenever it was, yesterday or today, that Dylan Roof, the young man who killed all those people in the church, was given the death penalty. And it's a kind of a sense of retributive violence, where we haven't been able to let go of that. And as opposed to retributive suffering, which is, the family members of the victims, were able to somehow move to a place of forgiveness. That's what it's supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. And even beyond that, it's supposed to go to the place that's even higher, even more exalted, which is to be able to, how can you see Dylan Roof as your kin? Which is exactly where we're called to be.
You shared a story yesterday, too, about a shooter in Florida. And that person saying, I kept hearing voices in my head. I kept hearing voices in my head. And I have, a few people who are constantly telling me about something called being a targeted individual. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where it's like electronic warfare on certain individuals where they can drive them crazy and cause them to hear voices in their head. And so I know that, like, when I saw the Dylan Roof example, it made me instantly, when that happened, think, I wonder if there is that. We see these lone shooter events that are happening all over the place. And so when I saw that he was given the death penalty, it didn't feel good to me, even though what happened was absolutely horrible. We don't know what's actually happened to this kid who did this terrible thing.
Yeah, except that mental illness is absolutely real, and so...
Or maybe there is targeted...
Yeah, I don't really believe that at all. But I certainly know that mental illness is absolutely real. Recently I testified at a death penalty sentencing case, and the prosecutor said to me, speaking of the defendant who was a gang member who killed multiple people, he said, what would you call a person who says, I love to kill? And I said, that is a mentally ill person. Now, I will say that the difference between, the prosecutor knew that to be the truth as well, but the difference between myself and the prosecutor was I said it on the stand, and he would only say it, I'm sure, at home with his loved ones. Of course that's a mentally ill person.
Right.
And yet that's not the answer he wanted. He wanted me to say, a monster says, I love to kill. A demon says that. But, if you know that demonizing is always untruth, then you know how to steer clear from it. And you say, no matter what, we belong to each other. Even people who do the most egregious, horrifying things are our kin. And so, you have Jesus who sees the guy with epilepsy and says he's possessed by a demon. Well, with all due respect to Jesus, no, he has epilepsy. And now, 2,000 years later, we say, here's a pill and this will control your seizures. But demonizing was even untruthful then, to kind of say this person with an actual illness and malady belongs to us. And so, but that's a good parable for how we can isolate and keep people out of our connection and our circle of compassion.
So when you are having this opportunity to talk to the listeners on Kauai, and actually there's quite a few from around the islands and Japan and some different places, what words of hope do you have for them, or pathways, like if somebody doesn't have the facilities that you're talking about? Like here on Kauai, we really do not have a place when somebody is violently mentally ill. And then, I watch this situation, and nobody wants to take that person in because it is a little frightening to take that person in. But do we just keep marginalizing that person till they're so frustrated that something happens? I mean, it's like it's in a community of 70,000 people, it's hard to raise the kind of funds that it might be where you're at. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, what can we do?
I don't know. I mean, again, but the first principle is somehow, what connection do you feel to these folks? And our life sort of is dependent on our ability to go to the margins and to be in the vicinity of folks who are demonized and easily despised and readily left out. If we can go to those folks, find them, because every community has them, and that you're kind of, your, if you will, your salvation is dependent on it, and it's also where the joy is. You go to the margins because the margins get erased if you go there, but you also are brought to the fullest kind of joy and meaning and purpose by accompanying them. if I could speak biblically, the covenant was about the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And God said, as I have loved you, you must have a preferential love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And the reason is because these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have experienced this particular kind of suffering, God thinks they're trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to kinship and connection, to a more perfect union. And that's why you go there. You don't go there to rescue the widow, orphan, the stranger, or to fix them, or to save them. You go there because your life depends on it. Because these are the guides. John Sobrino, who's a Jesuit theologian, has a very provocative title of a book called No Salvation Outside the Poor. And his sense is, this is why you go there, because these are the trustworthy guides who can lead you beyond greed and beyond the kinds of things that you deal with here and we deal with in Los Angeles, things that keep us apart from each other.
So you've had a lot of guides, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And
again,
so has it transformed you? I mean, what is
completely,
your
completely. So when people kind of pat me on the back and say, "Wow, how do you do it?" And I think, what is it supposed to be hard? A, and B, I've died and gone to heaven. I wouldn't change my life for anybody's. I've learned everything of value in the last 30 years walking with this population. And I think saving lives is really for the Coast Guard. I mean, I'm not really interested in it. I'm just interested in being in the presence of trustworthy guides.
And so part of the whole process is learning to receive in an open-hearted and I would say humble heart. In Hawaiian, the word is ha'a. And that's actually, you may know this, but like when they do hula, the knees are bent, the hips are bent. That is standing in ha'a. It's standing in humility, as the story is being told. And humility and tenderness seems like one of the very key ways to be able to reach people who are carrying a heavier burden.
Mm-hmm. And that's the revolution, I think, is a revolution in humility and tenderness. And I believe that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness is in the end going to be able to alter the course of our world and in ways that are beneficial. So that's what you want to put your confidence in.
Thank you. Marshall, you've been quiet today. Do you have any reflections? And we've had callers. Is there some thoughts that are coming out of people?
No, nothing from callers. Nothing from the callers. And boy, I'm just sitting here loving this high-minded conversation. It's really a relief from the nature of most of what's going around right now. It's great to hear what you're doing, and I so appreciate you sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Do you find that your team of people, it's like your larger family, right? You're at home, you're with all your, as you say, homies. Are they paying attention to the political environment that's underway? Is it just more of the same for them, or are they concerned and involved and have an opinion?
I mean, we had a lot of voter registration. We had especially, a lot of felons who, have been denied the right and trying to educate who can vote and those who are off parole. And so it galvanized a lot of interest and a lot of voting.
And
they were dismayed, but
we have a caller here in Hawaii. As long as you're not incarcerated, you can vote. Aloha, you're on the air.
Hi, Felicia, yes. PBS last night had something similar to this program in Boston, the Marathon Place. They have a program for people with, can't remember, drug addiction, but they had another name for it, as well as homeless and gang people and those just out of prison. And it is focusing them on running. So I think it's within some religious group. It's called Hope, the name of the group, but they have a name for themselves, and they wear these blue shirts. And I can't remember anything more detailed.
Okay,
but it
well,
was
we'll look for that.
last night on PBS NewsHour.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for that voting thing. I told my friend, who has her nephew in Eloy, Arizona, that in Hawaii, if you are not in jail, you can vote.
Right. You can be guilty and you're going to go to jail in 2 months and you can vote. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Aloha.
Aloha. Aloha, thank you for holding. You're on the air.
Aloha. I love what this man is saying. I wholeheartedly support him. And I especially want to address what he said about finding out what you cherish and focusing on that and making that a consciousness in your life. And when you've lost and you find yourself in deep grief, I would just add that it's really just probably as powerful a thing as anything you can do to allow yourself simply to feel, to just go totally into the grief, the sadness, the loss, the fear, the anger, and be in it, and let yourself be immersed in it, dance with it until it becomes your partner, and it can become actually bliss, and you can come out the other side and be so much better, so much healthier and present, even though you may never get over the loss. At least you've learned to be it and be with it, and you can come out the other side and be healthy and whole again.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think in this year where we've had profound amount of loss on this island, every year we lose a lot, but we certainly have seemed like we've lost a lot this year. And even in the public sphere, a lot of heroes, that a lot of people have been gone. So that's a great thought to end on. Thank you so much for calling.
Surrender. Well, embracing what is without resistance. You resist, you hurt yourself. If you surrender, you're one.
Thank you.
Plus, I think, you can locate your heart now just because it's broken.
Yes. Thank you so much for your great show.
Okay, aloha. You want to give us a final aloha? Or?
Aloha.
Okay, and Marshall?
Aloha.
Aloha.